Many people suffer from a debilitating fear called thalassophobia. They experience a fear of large bodies of water like the ocean so intensely that it interferes with their everyday lives. It is understandable though, none of us can truly know what lurks in the watery depths of the ocean. Crushing pressure, inky blackness, and freezing cold conditions mean that only the most specialized creatures can exist down there. But what if we're only seeing part of the picture? When you think that even with our advanced scientific understanding, we've barely explored 5% of the Earth's seas, you begin to think that maybe the pirates were right to believe in monsters. Welcome to Walk the Plank. Folklore. Pirate folklore is rich with references to various different sea monsters all across the globe and the centuries. Even more wonderful is the fact that pirates sometimes included tales of these beasts in their maps to warn other pirates of fearsome monsters. Some of these include, in 1603, Flemish Abraham Ortelius published a map showcasing a terrifying looking whale-like creature that he called the Styperiador. With large teeth and some sort of antenna sprouting from its forehead, the Styperiador looks dangerous and yet was apparently a docile creature that would protect fishermen from other more deadly creatures. A 1621 map included a beast called Jasconius. The story comes from a tale called The Legend of St. Brendan, which goes that St. Brendan landed on the creature's back thinking that it was an island, and decided to spend the night on land and not in their ship. The night passes peacefully and all seems to be going swimmingly until they light a fire to cook their Easter morning breakfast. The poor creature wakes up, making the group of travelers realize that the land they're standing on is a little more scaly than the average island. They flee to the safety of their ship, leaving the poor confused Jasconius trying to put his tail in his mouth. Like something out of a nightmare, the sea eagle crops up in a 1573 map. It's likely supposed to be a representation of a stingray, but with the furry low parts and long mouse-like tail, it gives stingrays a bad name. Another terrifying monster is the sea chimera. The map depicts a creature with a long serpentine tail that catches on fire, but also a bird-bug face that shoots out smoke. Hydras. Hydras are mythical beasts that are described as having 9 heads, all of which will grow back if you cut it off. Originally from the Greek myth of Hercules, the legend of the Hydra persisted well into the 18th century as a fearsome beast that appeared to be impossible to kill. In a 17th century book called the Historia Animalium, the Hydra is depicted as having multiple heads, each wearing some sort of crown, with 2 clawed feet and a long muscular tail for a body. In this portrait, the Hydra also has odd-looking suction cups all over its body. As a result, some scholars think that this means that the Hydra could be based on an octopus since you could substitute tentacles for heads. Perhaps not, but the Hydra was certainly an inspiration for the Pirates of the Caribbean story Legends Lost, where Sparrow and the crew come hunting for a magical cloak that was guarded by a 4-headed serpent. The Kraken. The Kraken was a fearsome sea monster that comes from Nordic folklore and terrorized pirates across the Northern Sea. First described by a Norwegian king, the Kraken then appeared all over the world, although mostly staying in the waters around Norway and Iceland. According to legend, the Kraken had many tentacles and preyed on unwary ships to crush them and send all souls on board to a watery grave. One of the earliest depictions of the Kraken comes from a map in the 13th century that shows an enormous tentacled creature wrapping itself around a ship. It was said that the whirlpool created as the Kraken descended to the depths once more was actually more destructive than the creature itself. Other descriptions of the creature say that it was more like a crab, with many arms that could reach up to the very topmasts of a ship and crush the timbers before dragging the ship back down below the waves. In actuality, it's likely that the fearsome Kraken was actually just a giant squid or giant octopus. It's thought that the carcasses of these sea-dwelling giants would be washed up on the rocky shores of Norway, and without any understanding of what these 8-armed 2-tentacle beasts could be, the Norwegians invented the Kraken. Over time, the Kraken grew from a healthy 46-foot-long squid that could maybe capsize a small boat, to a 300-foot-long Leviathan that could sink a man-o'-war. Leviathans. The Leviathan originally comes from the Bible, and may not strictly be a monster that pirates believed in, but would be ashamed to miss it off the list. It's entirely possible that pirates would have known about and feared the Leviathan. The Leviathan was a primordial sea serpent that at various points has been described as having sharp teeth, armored scales, and even being able to breathe fire. Leviathans could have been inspired by whale carcasses, particularly sperm whales. At up to 67 feet long and with a tendency to get itself stuck on shallow beaches, sperm whales were behemoths that would have defied all explanation. With a mouthful of teeth to boot, it's no wonder that pirates were worried about mysterious beasts that could sink their ships if they'd ever seen a dead sperm whale. Soe Orm. Similar to the Kraken and the Leviathan too is another sea monster that struck fear into pirates' hearts in the 16th century. Known as the Soe Orm, this monster was said to be about 200 feet long and inhabited the rocky coast of Norway. An amazing picture of this beast comes from a man called Olaus Magnus and shows a giant serpent that is coiling itself up to attack a ship and drag a sailor into the water by his waist. Legend has it that this fearsome sea serpent would emerge from its cave during warm summer nights to slither on land and feast upon unwary livestock. On the nights that it couldn't get lamb or veal, the Soe Orm would eat cuttlefish, crab, or lobster. In terms of its appearance, the Soe Orm was reported to be 200 feet long, 20 feet in diameter, and be covered in sharp brown scales, with flaming eyes and a mane of hair at least 2 feet long around its neck. It is now thought that the Soe Orm might be an enigmatic creature called the oarfish. This shy creature is the longest bony fish alive and rarely makes contact with humans, but we've seen enough of it to know that it can be up to 50 feet long and have a red coxcomb of spines around their heads and a long red fin that runs down their backs. Mermaids and Sirens. From monstrously huge to monstrously dangerous beings, mermaids were well known and well feared. Mysterious maidens appearing in places that they definitely couldn't have been, who lured sailors to their deaths with their haunting songs and beautiful appearances. According to pirate folklore, mermaids were mercurial creatures who could either help a crew or kill them all, depending on their mood. Pirates believed that seeing a mermaid was an omen, but it was impossible to tell whether that was good or bad. Mermaids and sirens don't look like the typical sea monster of legend, but their actions speak volumes. From Odysseys to Dilorli, sailors and pirates have feared beautiful women for their power to control them. For who could resist the allure of a maiden all alone, even if she is half fish? Some people actually claim to have seen mermaids, including Christopher Columbus. In 1493, Columbus wrote that he spotted 3 mermaids, although he seemed pretty disappointed and complained that they, quote, are not as beautiful as they are painted, since in some ways they have a face like a man. A century later, Henry Hudson claimed that a number of people on board his vessel spotted a mermaid who had a tail like a porpoise. In fact, nobody knows where the mermaid's legend came from. There are various thoughts as to how the mermaids came to be, but one of the least insane theories is that a drunken sailor caught a glimpse of a manatee surfacing, and somehow mistook this gentle, whiskery mammal for a beautiful woman. Perhaps that says more about what your mind will come up with when you've been at sea for too long, rather than about how mermaids might look. Although in a possibly telling twist, the name for the classification of both manatees and dugongs is Sirenia. Perhaps there's more to the idea that manatees could have been the original siren. Davy Jones' Locker and the Flying Dutchman. Less of a monster and more of a monstrous place, Davy Jones' Locker is a pirate's way of referring to the bottom of the ocean. Dating back to 1751, the idea of getting sent to Davy Jones' Locker would have been terrifying to most pirates, as most of them couldn't swim. The name also gave rise to some other interesting phrases, including to be in Davy's grip, meaning to be close to death or frightened, or to awaken Davy Jones, which meant to cause a storm. The other legend that struck fear into pirates' hearts was the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship that raced ahead of a raging storm. The Flying Dutchman was a trade ship returning home to Amsterdam after a successful trip to India, but the ship ran into trouble around the Cape of Good Hope and was soon caught in a terrible storm. The crew were terrified and begged the captain to take harbour, but being a reckless and greedy man, the captain refused and swore that he would return home even if the journey took him to Doomsday, just to set foot back home. The devil heard him and challenged him to try his luck. Either he'd make it back, or he'd be doomed to sail the seas for all time. The captain was foolhardy enough to carry on fighting the storm, damning the whole crew to share in his fate. The ship sank and everyone on it drowned, but the ghost ship continues to race around the world, unable to go to port and barely staying ahead of the storm that sank them in their last lives. Outro. Pirates were a suspicious bunch, which you can understand if you think that they spent weeks at a time away from land at the mercy of the elements. Unknown creatures would have taken on nightmarish proportions when seen in the middle of a cloudless night when your eyes are tired and beginning to play tricks on you. People in the golden age of piracy used stories to explain what they understood about the world, and these clearly were meant to represent what they were seeing, even if they didn't fully understand how or what it was. Over time, the scale of the monsters grew, but stayed linked to their original inspiration. The squid became the Kraken, the manatee became the mermaid, the whale became the Leviathan. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Walk the Plank. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Have a great week. Cheers!